Welcome, friends. It is high time that we take a moment to actually go over the movie news in the Star Trek universe right now, because there is a lot of it. They're popping out of the woodwork, and I have no idea what this means, if there's actually any intention behind it whatsoever. But as of yesterday, apparently some new news popped out. We are getting another new Star Trek movie, or at least it is in the works, because I have thoughts on that, especially considering some of the other movies that have been announced. But until we get to that point, let's take a look at the newest, at least according to Deadline. So if we come down here, exclusive. Even as it continues to develop the final chapter in its main Star Trek series, Paramount is looking to further explore the IP. The studio has tapped Toby Haynes to direct a new film that expands on the Star Trek universe, with Seth Grahame-Smith penning the script. J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot is producing. None of that is all that surprising, J.J. Abrams and Bad Robot being involved. That seems likely. The writing team on this, whatever the directors, since we don't really know anything about what this movie is going to be, and even as we come down a little further, we're not going to get any more insight, at least as far as the storyline, the characters, any of that. But let me get into that, because there is a little bit of interest here as far as what could be included in this. Sources tell Deadline that while plot details are being kept under wraps, which could just mean they don't have a plot yet, or a lot of it's dependent on the characters and the cast that they can get in this, the project is an origin story that takes place decades before the 2009 Star Trek film that rebooted the franchise. Insiders add the final chapter in that main series, Star Trek IV, remains in active development. So there is potentially a lot to glean from this, even though we haven't been given any concrete facts, anything whatsoever. And that's, there actually is a little bit more here. Blah, blah, blah. This is just talking about the background of what led to Paramount adding Picard, Strange New Worlds, things like that. Then a little backstory on who the Smith guy is, his credits with Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, the Lego Batman movie. And it's all just background stuff, nothing that actually tells us more about the movie. But the intriguing part, or what is seemingly intriguing, is, well, I guess twofold. One, they want this to be in the Kelvin universe, and you might be thinking to yourself, the Kelvin universe kind of started when Nero went back and kind of fractured time, so why would anything in the Kelvin universe set prior to those events not just be a prequel to the actual prime Star Trek universe as well? And technically, it really should. Technically, all of the events that happened prior to that first arrival in the giant space vacuum that the red matter created, all of that weird convoluted sci-fi stuff, everything prior to that should be a one-to-one exact copy of what happened in the prime Star Trek universe, except, and this is something that was never addressed in the movies, it's just been kind of shunted to the annals of, I don't know, beta canon comics and whatever. Supposedly what occurred when that happened is time didn't change in a linear fashion. Similar to how when you kind of crack the ice or something, or throw a stone in the water, the ripples don't actually only move forward, they kind of reverberate backwards and around. So because of the inciting punch through time, history was changed, I don't know, I want to say like within 50 years, both ways. So it went backwards and rippled through a time, and that's why characters with different ages, blah, 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 blah. It's convoluted. It's not really scientific, but heck, it doesn't need to be. So that could potentially give us a reason as to why the prequel series in the Kelvin universe is different. But what would a prequel within the Kelvin universe actually look like? And why do we actually need that? Why do we keep jumping backwards to fill in gaps instead of moving ahead? That is one of the biggest issues that I've had with Star Trek over the past few years, is their determined lack of willingness to jump ahead. Now, sure, we had Discovery jump so far ahead that really nothing in the interim matters for the most part. I didn't necessarily care for the way they dealt with the storyline, the whole burn situation going on. The resolution of that was a bit wonky to me, but at least they were trying to get out of the past. And we've had something similar a little bit with Picard Season 3, and that's something I'll come back to a little bit later. No further movement in the future has happened there. The only real place we've had any further exploration in the future, and it's technically still in the past of where Picard was set, is Star Trek Prodigy, and we see how little love that show was actually given by Paramount. So it would be interesting to see why they are choosing to do this movie as a prequel, as opposed to anything else. Why do we need to explore a prequel of the Kelvin universe, let alone a prequel in the Star Trek universe in and of itself? Sure, I loved Enterprise. Sure, I want to see a continuation of Enterprise and to see those characters, but all in all, those storylines are still just trying to slot into pre-existing canon instead of telling a new, fresh story that can take us in a new direction. It comes to mind that maybe this is a stopgap measure to show, hey, if you're not going to come together and give us that Star Trek 4 with Chris Pine and all of those people, we're just going to do something else with other people. Maybe it's a bargaining chip to try and get those people on board to actually come back and do the Star Trek 4. But is that something that is still viable at this point? Are people really itching to see a fourth Kelvinverse movie? I would go out and see it. I don't have any significant problems with the Kelvinverse existing in and of itself, except for Into Darkness was kind of just a bad movie all around. But the fact that now we have all of this Star Trek on TV that's kind of doing its own thing and adding cinematic elements, which is, again, is another problem in my opinion. Is there really a need to have this alternate universe unless they're going to try to do some convoluted bringing them together in some form or some fashion? And that's something that could be just a problem in and of itself. But as I mentioned, there are other Star Trek movies that have kind of been announced, although I think this other prominent one that's been going around in the last few weeks, isn't going to be exactly what people are assuming. Patrick Stewart reveals new Star Trek movie script featuring Jean-Luc Picard is in the works now. Apparently, this was all done in some sort of interview back in November, I think, that just didn't come out until a few days ago. I think probably around November when he was promoting his book, his memoir, his novel, whatever you call it. It's not a novel. I can't think of the right word, but making it so, whatever it's called. He said that there is a script being written for a Jean-Luc Picard movie. I have to imagine it's not just a specifically Jean-Luc Picard-centered movie, unless it's supposed to be another prequel, and by God, I hope that's not the case, where it's just old man Patrick Stewart kind of narrating his early life, and then we see most of it in flashback to some other person playing him, and he's just kind of bookending it with the storyline. I don't need to see that, but that seems to be the type of thing they would do. It seems more so that this is supposed to be picking up where the ball was dropped at the end of Picard Season 3, maybe potentially, as I've seen speculated elsewhere, a setup for that Star Trek Legacy series, which it seems like a lot of people were very much wanting, and a lot of people still do want it, but for some reason over the past couple of months, a lot of the people that were originally fans of Picard Season 3 have kind of been changing their tune. They've been saying, actually, it's not a great thing. We need to stop playing with the old toys and do something new. So even if we don't get a dedicated Star Trek Legacy show with all of the children and the grandchildren and the side characters of all of our friends from the past, even if we just set something after the events of Picard Season 3, I really think we need to explore this era of Star Trek instead of continuously jumping backwards, filling in gaps, doing an alternate timeline that just so happens to take place in the same era that we've spent so much time in. We want to go forward. And I know it's a little bit tricky because now Discovery has cemented this dedicated future and where the Federation and Starfleet exists in that future. Although that is easy to write around if you just want to say when they skip to the future, they skip to an alternate future or something, or timey-wimey shenanigans with the Romulans who are changing time in Strange New Worlds have just kind of fundamentally altered things so that the 25th century we see in whatever show we see going forward doesn't have to intrinsically line up with the future we see in Discovery. Heck, we don't even know how Discovery is going to end, so for all we know, they could return to their own time at the end of that. I don't think that's the case, specifically since they didn't know it was going to be their last season when they went into Season 5, but all things are possible through Trek. So this leads me to the question, why are we getting all of these announcements of movies, and a lot of it just seems like a stopgap measure? I mentioned prior that we had the whole prequel thing going on with the Kelvin universe, which seems to be a theatrical movie, by the way. It wasn't explicitly stated, but based on who is involved, it looks like that's supposed to be a theatrical release. I was originally under the assumption that the Picard movie, as mentioned here, was going to be theatrical as well, a next generation type outing, but now I'm not so sure. I think this is actually being planned as the follow-up to the Section 31 movie, which is going to be released exclusively to Paramount Plus. And that is the other third movie we're doing here, which, if you can recall, was announced billions of years ago, apparently, as a television series, and for whatever reason, that fell apart. Michelle Yeoh was just so popular with all of the fandom and the rest of the world. She kept winning awards and just doing all of this stuff. So, quite frankly, they weren't going to let that slip through their fingers no matter what. They turned it into a movie. She was definitely on board because she wanted to play this character more, so they let that happen. But it's kind of now setting up this precedent of churning out these made-for-TV movie type events on Paramount Plus, and I don't know how I feel about that. Section 31, just as a general concept, is not something I'm all that overly pleased with in the Star Trek franchise in general. I liked it in Deep Space Nine when it was this weird one guy who may or may not be making it up, this shadowy organization. We didn't really see many of them. The way it's just been portrayed so out in the open in current Star Trek, I'm not a huge fan of. Be that as it may, I am cautiously optimistic that this will actually be fun, just because Michelle Yeoh is involved. Whether or not I care for the stakes and how this actually interacts with the universe is another question, but I think the character work and the acting, at the very least, will be something that we can look back on. But what does this mean for Paramount and Star Trek overall? They're not announcing any new series besides the ones that were kind of already in the works a while ago. That's the Starfleet Academy show. Everything else we've been getting so far has been legacy stuff that's just getting new seasons. A new Lower Decks, a new Strange New Worlds, the end of Discovery. It seems like they're kind of just treading water, spinning their wheels until they can kind of chart this new course. They haven't greenlit a Star Trek Legacy show, although if this Picard movie actually does turn around to become a real thing, half of that, I think, is potentially just to placate Patrick Stewart, because he's not getting any younger. If this thing doesn't go into production ASAP, there won't be a Picard movie. And I know that's morbid, and I know that's a terrible thing to say, but there's a very finite and limited amount of time we have with this man right now, and if they're not going to get this thing moving ASAP, I don't really foresee a Picard movie happening. I don't really think a Picard movie is a good choice unless it's an ensemble thing, and even as an ensemble thing, why does it need to exist? We had a pretty good wrap-up at the end of Picard Season 3, so unless it's that soft pilot to the Legacy series I have seen a lot of people speculating on, I don't think we actually need it. And as a soft pilot to Legacy, is that something we need? I know back in the day, having a 2-hour movie set up a show was kind of a big deal, kind of a thing that they did. But are we really in that era anymore? Do we need a dedicated movie that's going to kind of eventually wrap into a series anymore? Or can we just kind of shoot and produce a really big budget pilot, kind of similar to how Discovery did when they came on the scene? I don't really think we've had that in any other Star Trek series that's come on since. They've all been basically just thrust straight into series, so we haven't really set anything up. But why are we just so focused on turning Star Trek into movies instead of moving forward? And I think that's the bigger discussion right now. Is this just a sign that they don't know the course they want to chart in the future? Is there a problem with funding? We know that there's probably a problem with funding, and they can't really greenlight all of these new shows, because if you're going to do a new show, heck, even a new movie that involves a different time frame, you need to build sets. You need to come up with all of the costuming. All of these things need to be done at the start. So if you're building a new ship, a new set, getting a whole cast of new characters with brand new Starfleet uniforms we haven't seen before, maybe a new planet you want to set things on, this is all a very dedicated amount of money and a dedicated amount of time and space you need right off the bat. If you keep doing these one-off movies that can reuse assets you already have, you're kind of just coasting and you're not really planting your flag and saying this is the new way forward. And it seems they're not willing to right now chart this course forward. We're just in a holding pattern to see what sticks until we can actually move forward. So until they greenlight Legacy, until they come up with something new, it seems like all we're going to be getting is more continuations of the things already in the pipeline, already in production. And that's where I think we are running into danger of getting to that stagnation point again. And without something substantial, new and shiny for fans and non-fans alike to kind of latch onto, I fear we are going to start losing more and more people and just hold on to those legacy fans who are already in it for the long term. Those are just my thoughts, though. I know this was rambly and I didn't really have much to say. Paramount might not necessarily be overseeing things as far as keeping a close eye on Star Trek right now, and that might bode poorly for what's going on. Are they trying to ramp up to sell Star Trek? Are they trying to ramp up to cut costs on Paramount? Is Paramount going to merge with someone else? Are they going to get rid of it, dismantle it? I don't know what's going on, but couple that with the fact that Prodigy is now on Netflix and the movies, the legacy movies have left Paramount because they needed the money apparently, so they're licensing them to someone else. We only actually had a couple of months where it was Paramount Plus, the home for all things Star Trek, before it really fell apart and they started piecemealing things. So I'm getting this bad feeling in my gut that the new golden age of Star Trek is starting to fall apart and they don't have a clear vision for the future. I may be worrying over nothing. For all I know, they have all these plans going on behind the scenes. They're just waiting to announce them at a much better time because remember, we're coming off those strikes and they really probably haven't had enough time to put the final touches on all of these things. If that's the case, I would be happy to be proven wrong, but it feels like all of these movies are just, as I've said before, a stopgap measure. Leave all your thoughts down below. What do you think's going on? Are you excited for these movies? Or are you just kind of like, I don't know. That's kind of where I am right now. Leave all that down below. Like, share, subscribe, throw some money at me if you want to. But until next time, live long and prosper.